Why are so many Americans fighting in Ukraine? And what happens to them if they get injured or killed? Well, the US government doesn't come to their rescue. Today, I'm speaking to someone who does. You're watching State of the World with me, Sally Lockwood, and my guest today is Megan Mobbs, who is president of the RT Weatherman Foundation, and you may have heard of her dad, Keith Kellogg. He is Donald Trump's special envoy to Ukraine. Hi, Megan. How are you?
How are you doing this morning? Or evening, I guess, for you.
I'm good. I can't believe you start your day this
I don't
early.
always, I will say, I don't always start my day this early. I'm looking a little bit ragged, but we're gonna make it happen.
You look great.
Well, you look fancy. Should I like throw on a blazer or something? Or do you want me to get a little bit fancier real fast?
No, you look perfect. Honestly, it's super relaxed. It's real, it's real. And I'm so sorry I'm a bit late. I was just picking up a sick
Oh
toddler from
no.
nursery.
I do, yeah.
You understand the juggle.
13-year-old, she was just doing math homework, getting ready. I mean, it's 6:40 here, so we're already a little bit like chaos for the day.
Thanks so much for finding time for this. So as well as being a super busy mom, I've been reading, by the way, your CV. It's pretty impressive. You're a former
Oh.
paratrooper. Are you kidding me? Psychologist and president of the RT Weatherman Foundation, a US nonprofit, which is the reason we're speaking today. I mean, it's quite a resume. Something that I think a lot of people aren't aware of, or at least not enough, is that there are Americans fighting in Ukraine. There are Americans getting injured in Ukraine on the front line, dying, and the US government doesn't get involved. But you guys do. Explain what happens.
Yeah, so actually, it's not just Americans. There are so many foreign volunteers that are fighting in Ukraine. I mean, in the thousands. And so we don't just help American families, which we'll talk about here in just a minute. We actually do a lot with over 24 nations now at this point. And we're actually official partners with the British government. So there are some governments that are willing to partner and do a little bit more. And I will say, I want to make sure that I'm not government bashing here, because this is a remarkable challenge for any government, because this is the largest land war in Europe since World War II. It's extraordinarily complicated. There are thousands of Americans fighting, and we know officially that there has been at least 92 Americans that have been killed. And so of those 92 that have been killed, we actually work with approximately 50 of those families to do all the things that you might imagine are critically necessary after a loved one is killed. In some cases, we assist with identification and repatriation. In other instances, we assist with DNA being placed in the system to match against a set of remains. And then we help all of them navigate the bureaucracy to receive the benefits that their families have earned as a result of their loved one's sacrifice. But to your point earlier, unfortunately, both our government but also the Ukrainian government can't manage all of these different families, all of these different countries, which, by the way, have different sets of issues or challenges related to apostling or notarizing documents and all of that. So I was just with 7 of our families last night. Here in DC, there's a bunch of advocacy going around, and 2 of the moms spoke about their loss. And one of the things they said that I think is so critically important is that obviously they can never replace the loss of their son, and every day is a day and a journey in sadness and grief. But they are so extraordinarily proud of their sons and what they were willing to do for what they believe to be for freedom and actually for America, not even just Ukraine, but for America.
Wow, that's incredible that they're so proud. I mean, of course they are. It's their children who've done something extraordinarily brave. But how do they try and square the circle that their children have crossed the Atlantic to go and fight in a foreign war that is not their own? How do they process that?
Because I think they do, and I obviously never want to speak for them, but I can use some of their words. So, so I don't want to make any direct attribution, but they do, almost to a person, talk about that. It doesn't not feel like our war, that it deeply feels like our fight in many different ways. And all of these men were American veterans, and they fought in Iraq or Afghanistan. And one of the moms speaking last night, her son, Corey Naraki, was killed on 27 October last year. So it was just the 1-year anniversary of his death. We went and visited him in Arlington National Cemetery, and he's qualified to be buried in Arlington National Cemetery because of his American service. He was a Marine First Sergeant, 2 Purple Hearts, a Bronze Star with Valor, and he deeply believed in the idea of serving something greater than himself. And so when he saw this war happen, he said, "Mom, I have to go. I need to go because I have these skills and I can help them." So these moms actually, and in their sons, how they talked about it, they don't feel like it was some war far away. They realize that if we don't stop it there, that war eventually will come here in some capacity and in some way.
And who are these Americans that are going to fight in Ukraine, Megan? I mean, are they mainly US veterans, or are they adventurers, thrill seekers? Who are they?
So I think it's a broad spectrum, as you always have in war, right? There's always going to be a vast swath of people that find themselves compelled by what is arguably one of the most human experiences. Everybody says that, kind of peace is the natural order. That's completely wrong. Actually, I think war, chaos is actually the natural order. Society just tries to contain it to the best of their ability. So you have veterans who feel very called and compelled by values. So they believe that they're fighting for the things that were indoctrinated in or cultivated in them during their military service. You do have those that are adventure seekers or thrill seekers. You have some of those that are kind of escaping their life here for whatever reason. But almost all of them to a point. And there's some, let's just be very honest. There's some bad actors, right? There's always going to be bad actors. But most of them feel compelled by the cause. And if they were one of those other categories, escaping something or thrill seeking, when they get to Ukraine and they see what's happening and they meet the people and they engage in the communities and all of that, they become extraordinarily moved by the plight of what's happening. And so ultimately, it's a whole group of people, but all of them, especially the ones that we spend a lot of time with, those men, those boys, just felt extraordinarily called to this duty.
I remember at the beginning of the war standing on the train station platform at Lviv train station. Yeah. And it was, weeks into the war, very, very early on. And the platform was packed with people trying to get out of Ukraine. And I was watching dads saying goodbye to their kids and their wives on the platform. I mean, it was really emotional, seeing these really, really emotional goodbyes as men said goodbye to their kids through the train station window. And I remember spotting through the crowd 3 British former soldiers. And I could tell because I'd spent a lot of time with British troops in Afghanistan, and I knew the backpack and I knew the jackets. And I went over and spoke to them, and they didn't want to be on camera. They didn't want to be on record. But just as you say, they felt compelled to do something. Now, I don't know what happened to those 3 guys. But a lot of foreign fighters have got injured and killed, Megan. And that's where you guys come in. Tell me what you do, and I guess just how complicated it is extracting these people from the front line.
So it's quite complicated, but I just want to take a minute and just mention the courage of the British fighters. There are many Brits fighting, and I served a little bit alongside with them in Afghanistan as well. And again, to almost a man, the reason why they're there is because of that compelling reason to do something bigger than themselves and how deeply they felt called when they saw what was happening. In similar way for me, as a former paratrooper, like you mentioned, to see Russian canopies over Europe and not there as an aspect of liberation, right? I was trained like paratroopers there to seize airfields, liberate those that have been oppressed, and it was morally rupturous. It was extremely, extremely damaging. So I when you talk about those British guys, I want to make sure I just give a quick shout out to the bravery of all of them. But to your point, it's very complicated, and it's complicated for a whole host of reasons related to fighting in Ukraine, especially if you're a foreigner. At the beginning, it was a little bit, chaos then too, but they were all mostly confined to the International Legion, which is where most of them were fighting at the time. It's no longer the case. I mean, there are now, and it wasn't really true at the beginning either, but especially now, foreign volunteers are all over the place. They're in every unit, from Defense Intelligence to the International Legion to 3rd Assault Brigade to Azov. So they're all over. And what that means, though, is like we would have in our military, every unit has different standard operating procedures on how they process and proceed with things. All of them have different budgets. All of them have different command structures. So there really is no one-size-fits-all solution for when something terrible happens. And so as a result, but building that flexibility in those relationships have been critically important. But also just the reality of full-scale war means in particular that when someone is killed, retrieving those remains is not a simple process. And I think that oftentimes in the West, especially for me, who was a logistician, mortuary affairs was a military occupational specialty that fell underneath my work. There was a whole process by which you would retrieve remains, document all of it, and then help return them home. it's not possible at this scale of war, and they just don't have the people capable of doing that. And so what that means, especially for some of these operations where foreign volunteers are, when they're killed, their remains lay where they fall. And so then subsequently, you do have a substantial amount of time that could pass by which those families maybe are notified, maybe are not, but then don't receive those remains. And so we work alongside our Ukrainian partners, always in concert and partnership, to help do investigative work at times to help find those remains. And we'll do interviews to ensure that we know where we're looking. We go to the forensic facilities and the morgues in order to help do that identification. We work with those families, whether it's here in the US, in the UK, New Zealand, doesn't matter. We help them put their DNA in the database in order to allow that match if we find those remains. And then we also, depending on if they're on contract or not, we help repatriate them, so return them home with dignity and honor in order to make sure there is that closure for families. And that's just on the missing in action and killed in action side. And that was a very cursory overview. It's vastly more complicated than that. But then if you're wounded in action, and it depends on the injury. There's some great hospitals in Ukraine. There's unfortunately not some great hospitals in Ukraine. It's like any healthcare system, unfortunately. But we will help do some evacuation of wounded in action to specific hospitals in Europe if they require some specialty intervention, plastics, nerve grafts, skin grafts, burns, things like that.
And if you guys weren't doing this, what would happen to them?
There's plenty of folks that are doing evacuations, just to be honest. There's no one doing what we're doing around the identification of the fallen, the repatriation, and doing all of the necessary navigation of the legal system in order to receive home personal effects, in order to receive sometimes the remains home, but also to, again, help those families navigate all of the different aspects of what I just mentioned. This is a really quick nerdy aside, but in our military, we have a designation called Missing in Action Presumed Dead, by which you are legally codified as being dead, even if you are missing in action. This happened during World War II when pilots were going down over the water and we knew we would never be able to retrieve their remains. Unfortunately, Ukraine does not have a similar legal designation, meaning you're either missing in action or you are killed in action. And so subsequently, if you are missing in action, even if there is overwhelming evidence that this person has been killed in action, they don't receive that death certificate. They don't receive that legal designation. And so those families can't do all of the required things like closing bank accounts, executing wills, all of those different things. And so we help the families navigate both the Ukrainian court system to petition for a death certificate and through the system in order to receive all the things that that individual is entitled to by their service.
Earlier, Megan, you said that there were thousands of Americans fighting in Ukraine, an estimated 92 who've been killed, and some have been captured by Russia, right? Mm-hmm. What's happened to them? Do you ever hear anything more?
So I would say our organization hasn't heard anything, and we're not necessarily involved in that specific subset of that. What I can say, though, is related to prisoners of war and the missing in action crisis is that confusion, challenge related to information in this type of operating environment is being increasingly used by the Russians to sow discontent, to sow discord, to target families to get them to do extreme things. Like there was that incident in Lviv. I think it was slightly more complicated than the one I'm about to say. But one of the reasons why there was the assassination of that high-level Ukrainian figure is allegedly the assassin son was taken captive, potentially, or killed in the Bakhmut direction. And then the Russians were able to exploit his grief to compel him to do something awful because they kept telling him they had information about his missing son. Well, I think it's why you see the Ukrainian government pushing very aggressively during negotiations around prisoners of war. But it's why, as a foundation, we are so aggressively pushing on assisting Ukrainians, not just with foreign missing in action, but Ukrainian missing in action, so we can help those families receive that closure. And then we can also help kind of build that stability and trust in the system that they care about those individuals.
And does the US government actively discourage Americans from going to fight in Ukraine, or do they turn a blind eye?
So it's a bit of both, right? So they do, their formal position is that don't come. This is a war zone. It's dangerous. Do not come do this. There are laws in the books that say, fighting for a foreign government, that pilots going during World War II into the RAF, the Royal Air Force, into Canada to fight before we formally entered. In general, what I have found is that most governments, whether it's ours, the British, the Canadian, whomever, they deeply love their people. And so if they find themselves in Ukraine, if they find themselves fighting, they don't turn a blind eye in the sense they don't care. They do as much as they can within their power, within their legal authority to assist these families.
I mean, people won't necessarily know this, but you do have a direct line to the White House. For people who aren't aware, your dad is General Keith Kellogg, who is Donald Trump's special envoy to Ukraine. And you work quite closely, not with your dad, but you do have, I guess, a good relationship with the White House and with the president. Do you think that Donald Trump brings up these American prisoners of war that Putin is now holding?
I'm not sure we, as in America, are fully aware of how many have been taken prisoners of war because of that codification I just mentioned before about missing in action. We don't know if they have been taken, and we don't know if they've been killed and their remains have just fallen. So one of the things my father, says quite publicly all the time, which is that this war has been internationalized, right? So you have the involvement of the axis of expansionists, right? Iran, North Korea, China, Russia involved. And similarly, we have to just be, I think, very honest. I don't know if my dad would say this. I will. I don't speak for him. We are involved. The West is involved. Not just the West. You have Japan, and you have all of those that believe in the free nations of the world. We are now coalesced around this idea, this belief that Ukraine is a symbol of the future of civilization in the West. Like if Afghanistan was the death of empires, right? Then maybe Ukraine perhaps is the savior of civilization if we can get it together. I have been extraordinarily impressed with the president's willingness to advocate for prisoners of war or prisoners around the world. I mean, we're seeing quite a substantial amount of advocacy around that. So perhaps that's something we should do a little bit more of pushing on.
Your relationship with your humanitarian work in Ukraine, that is separate. That is one thing. And then you have your dad's role as Donald Trump's envoy to Ukraine. Does that ever get messy? Do people ever assume that you're political somehow?
Of course it gets messy.
And does it make for awkward Sunday lunches with your dad if you disagree on something?
Actually, even outside of what I do with the foundation, I'm also the director for the Center of American Safety and Security, Independent Women, which is an all-women center-right think tank. So I do have one foot a little bit in the policy world, not the political world, the policy world. But of course it gets messy, right? People automatically assume that, maybe we're on the same page all the time, or that I always agree with what dad says, or that he always agrees with what I say. Though the worst kept secret in Washington that I'm very close with my dad. And we talk all the time, literally all the time. And I'm the one that brought him to Ukraine. It's also very well known. I brought him in 2023. I was the one that was, pushing him we should have, there needs to be some conceptualization around this for a future Trump administration. I always thought Trump was going to win again. So anyway, all that to say, it gets so sticky because I think people do automatically make that one-to-one, or oftentimes assume that I can persuade my dad to some position when my dad works for the president of the United States. My dad doesn't work for me. So I have two brothers. We're all very opinionated. We're all we all feel very strongly about what we believe in. And so it's always been like that in my family. I think this one is more emotion laden just because of my deep belief in Ukraine, my love for the people, my love for the country. And so that can be challenging when sometimes it can feel like I don't agree with what's happening, or I don't agree. And I have to be very careful, right, Sally? Because I never want to be put in a position where I can be used against my dad within the administration or outside the administration. And unfortunately, that's already happened. I've been used as this idea that dad is more loyal to Ukraine than he is to the president, or dad is more loyal to Zelensky than he is to Trump, which is all complete nonsense. But unfortunately, in Washington can be ugly, right? That's what they say. If you want a friend in DC, get a dog. It can be quite challenging at times. And so I think probably at some point now, I feel like this is turning into a therapy session, Sally, so thank you. But I feel like at some point, I will
welcome
apologize, because I feel like I've been a problem for my dad at times, unfortunately.
I'm sure he's immensely proud of you, and I'm sure people forgive you for being close to your dad. You say worst kept secret in Washington. Well, I think that's okay. But you certainly both hold extraordinarily important roles when it comes to Ukraine. And when you look at the state of the country, after the entire country has been consumed by war for 3 years now, it's hard to believe it's still going on. I still hear from friends in Ukraine who say it's actually worse. They feel terrorized now by these drones, and they're spending every night going up and down from the basement to their apartments. And, they've sent me pictures of like crashes created in the basement garage of their apartment block because they spend so much time in there. It's hard to understand. And we aren't talking about it as much as we used to because of the situation in the Middle East. We've seen what Donald Trump has done there in recent weeks. Fingers crossed the ceasefire holds. Do you think he will now set his sights on doing something similar when it comes to Ukraine? And how tough do you think that's going to be for him? Because his relationship with Zelensky is rocky. The last meeting they had in the White House, there were all those reports that it ended up being a screaming match. And then the summit with Putin was abandoned. Where are we now in terms of Donald Trump's thinking on Ukraine?
So I think you covered a lot there. So I think we're seeing very clear indications that the president is pivoting towards predominantly focusing on this conflict, right? After what happened in Gaza and Israel, right? Let's please pray that ceasefire holds. He's already saying on this trip in the East, talking about it's been challenging, but we're going to get it done. He talked before he even left about, a focus on the Russia-Ukraine situation. So I do think there's going to be more time given to how do you solve this. I do think that he, just quite frankly, I think he was extraordinarily well-intentioned. I think he genuinely believed that Putin and their relationship was going to be powerful enough for Putin to stop. I think he believed that very genuinely. I don't think it was because he was some type of gross Russia collusion. I think he thought, how could a man send millions of his own people to die? I think that that's for the Western world, it's actually a very difficult thing to conceptualize, right? When we had 50,000 come home in body bags in Vietnam, that was enough to cause mass rioting in the streets. I think what happened in the White House a couple of weeks ago, that last meeting with Zelensky and Trump, I'm not sure it was as rocky as everyone is kind of professing it to be. One of the things that, I'm a psychologist, one thing I don't think anybody really is talking about, actually how similar in personality those two men are, which means when you put them in a room together, there is inherently going to be some challenges on how they navigate that personality structure. So I don't think it was as rocky as everyone says it was, right? It certainly wasn't February. You had no rolling back of intelligence, no rolling back of weapons. And in fact, then what you had is this call between Lavrov and Rubio. That went badly. And you have this cancellation of the summit in Budapest. And now these really intense sanctions, the strongest sanctions that have happened since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. And then you have Trump committing to them being enforced. Now, is that going to be enough? I don't think so.
What about Melania when it comes to Ukraine? She understands Eastern Europe better than anyone in Donald Trump's inner circle. Do you think she influences him when it comes to Ukraine?
I think Melania influences him on everything because, there's been so many reports and they are so close. They have a very close relationship. People always want to tear, I think, both of them apart for so many different reasons. And I think it obscures the reality of how close they are and how often they talk about things. And so I think she, of course, has influence over him. And the president's even admitted it himself, right? That's what came out in the Oval. He said it a couple of times now that Melania has been like, wait a second, Donald, you have said that Putin wants peace. He just bombed, a maternity ward. So how much does he really want peace? So I think she has extraordinary influence. I think it's remarkable that she has taken up this in a way that, by the way, extraordinarily unusual for a first lady to have communication with a head of state, again, an adversarial head of state, is quite unique. The only incident I think can come to mind, actually, historically, I don't think there is, to this extent, a situation by which a first lady is kind of interjecting herself in this capacity. So I think that she's had significant influence and she should be praised for that. I think it can be a little bit fraught with some challenges, which is why I'm glad she has a good team around her, because the children's space, especially in the Russia-Ukraine, so full, and I know you know this, Sally, full of propaganda narratives that can be twisted and torn. And so I think it's going to be important that she has really made sure she has given good information around all of this.
Yeah, and she raised the issue, as you said, of Ukraine's stolen children. Thousands, tens of thousands are estimated to have been taken to Russia during this war. What do we know about where they are now and what's happened to them?
I think that's the problem, Sally, and this is why it's so frustrating, because I hear this all the time, like, Ukraine, give us this number, give us a list with names, where are they? Well, it's like when any type of human trafficking, they ensure that they erase
Yeah.
the records of where they are. And so if they do get identified where they are, they'll move them again. They've also reissued documentation. So it's extraordinarily difficult to identify where they are, who they are. In some instances, these were orphans, and so they don't have a direct connection. But I think that we should be so morally clear that this is a form of genocide. Stealing children to assign them a different nationality is genocide. And the fact that we are kind of waffling on this is beyond shocking to me.
Thank you so much for speaking so powerfully on that, because I actually, as a journalist, get really frustrated that we're not talking about this more. We're not shouting about this more. And they get referred to as Ukraine's stolen children, you know, that term that I annoyingly just used. But it doesn't do justice to what is happening.
Yeah.
and how shocking it is and how urgent it is for all these thousands of families who don't know where their kids are.
A couple of years ago, before I was going into Ukraine, I sometimes go through Krakow, and I thought to myself, I had never been to Auschwitz, and I was like, I want to go and I want to bear witness and I want to see. And I mean, first off, extraordinarily powerful experience in so many different ways. And you know, of course, we talk about things like, you know, never again, that we will never allow these things to happen. And so, you know, when we talk about these things, when we talk about the intentional orientation towards eradicating a population or the stealing of children, because it's right. I hate the phrase too, like stolen children. The amount of sexual violence that's been perpetrated against women, girls, and men in occupied territories, how they've used that as a way of impregnating women or forcing them so they can have children anymore, like forced sterilization. It is mind-blowing to me that we, and especially, again, I am a Republican. I am a 3-time Trump voter. People will call me MAGA. Like, I'm sure I have a MAGA hat laying around here. But the reason why I was so compelled by that movement was because it was rooted in this idea of American exceptionalism, that we have to lead, that America is exceptional, and nobody else has to believe that but me, but I believe that. And that because we are exceptional, that we have the responsibility to be leaders in the world, to be called to be morally clear about these things. And the fact that we're not, for me, that has been one of the most challenging things for me to reconcile, is how are we not screaming at the top of our lungs that this is unacceptable for any free nation to accept, let alone the leader of the free world.
What do you sometimes want to talk about that you don't get asked about when you're doing these interviews? Or what do you want people to know?
Well, so I would say for maybe can I truncate it into 2 things? I would say about my work. So the work with the RT Weatherman Foundation, I just wish more people knew about what we were doing. I wish more people understood all of the challenges related to both foreign volunteers, but also just the challenge related for all of these Ukrainian families around the missing in action problem, crisis, challenge, whatever you want to call it. Ukrainians deeply value life. They honor life the way that we do. And the problem with not being able to return home a family member of the dead is that they live in this ambiguous grief. And so I wish there was people talking more about this challenge and how war is not just about pulling triggers somewhere else. It's all of the things related to it, all the other aspects of it, building societal resilience, and that kind of relationship between the idea of memory and bodies. And so I just wish people would ask me more about that. But you did, so thank you for talking about it a little bit. What I find it on X especially is, and I've said this before, this is going to be very tongue-in-cheek, but I do genuinely feel like President Trump could bomb Moscow and people would still say, like, he's a Putin plant or he's a Russian whatever. And I think the reality is that obscures the conversation that we should be having related to this conflict. You mentioned it before. The war is much more deadly now. It's complicated. Now, I think we should be very morally clear. There's the aggressor and there's the aggressed. We should absolutely be standing with Ukraine. And when we keep the conversations around all of this at like what I just said before, like, you know, Trump is a Putin plant or whatever, we actually aren't able to get to genuine policy discussions about how this conflict ends. And the reality is, and this is where it's so hard because you know how deeply I love Ukraine and the people, it's not going to be pushing every Russian off of every inch of Ukrainian land. And if we anchor people to that, and if anybody else deviates from that, that they're somehow a traitor to Ukraine or to America, we're never going to get to a solution. And Ukraine is suffering. They cannot fight an endless war just by virtue of resources and people. And I think we're doing the people that I deeply love a disservice if we're not trying to have genuine conversations about how this war could end. And so I just wish we were talking a little bit more nuanced around that, rather than like Trump bad, Zelensky good, like Putin evil. Sure, but I think that's a useless conversation.
We'll just have to see how this plays out. Megan, let's talk again, because I don't see the war ending next week, but let's hope they're working on it and we have something to talk about soon in terms of some sort of a deal and what that looks like.
Yeah. Well, and that's the other, and this is talking about terms, and I'm like, you go, Sally. I hate talking about a deal. Like, it shouldn't be a deal. It never should have been a deal to begin with. I hate that phrase when we're talking about war, because, gosh, it makes it feel like like buying a car. And it's not. We're talking about hundreds of thousands, millions of lives. But I know there are amazing people like my dad and the president who are working on this very diligently, who actually do value human life. They do feel very compelled and called by that. So, yes, I hope you have something to talk about. And I hope that you can talk to some of our families, some of our moms who can tell
I'd love to.
Their experiences.
When you use the term deal, it is going to have to be a deal. And even Donald Trump, the way he talks about it, it sounds like a deal. Sometimes it sounds like he's literally going to draw lines on a map, Yeah. And I realize that does involve millions and millions of lives, but that is how this is going to end.
It is. I mean, so maybe like a settlement agreement. I don't know why the word deal for me is like, because it feels like, but you're right. You're exactly right. It's going to have to be some type of, like I mentioned before, some type of negotiated settlement. That's the unfortunate truth. But that is where I was saying earlier, I think the problem is it becomes so emotional when people talk about it and they get anchored to this idea that like the only positive way of moving forward in the West is getting every Russian off of every inch of Ukrainian territory. It's not possible unless we do go to war, and that's not going to happen. And so we should be able to say that without them being called a traitor to Ukraine, which happens to me quite often sometimes on X, because I do want to anchor people in reality, because I think that allows them then to really truly figure out the way forward, to emotionally reconcile all of it. It's not perfect. It's going to be ugly. There was never going to be a win-win situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And, definitely the views that are changing in Ukraine from those people who've staunchly said since the beginning that we want an outright victory and all Russians out of Ukraine. There is a shift in opinion now to so many people who just want this bloodshed to stop and this fighting to end. And, I think, you understand better than almost anyone exactly what that looks like. Megan, thanks so much for coming on. It's been fascinating.
Of course, Sally. Thank you for having me. Hopefully I'll be back.
Yeah, definitely. We'll definitely get you back on, and have a great day. Thank you so much.
Bye.
My thanks to Megan Mobbs and to you guys for watching. If you've liked this, please hit subscribe. It's totally free and it makes a big difference to how the channel grows. Leave a comment, let me know what you'd like to hear more about. Hit like, share this with your friends, tell everyone about us. It really helps us out. We're completely independent and we're growing organically, so your support means everything. I'll see you soon.